So, I decided to do my speech on John F. Kennedy's speech that concerned the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the 1960s. The speech was given on October 22nd, 1962, and it was about the Russian military, or Soviet Union military, and they were hiding missiles in Cuba. And it was a really big deal because this could have caused a nuclear weapon war to occur between the United States and the Soviet Union, and it would have also damaged Cuba in the process. So, the concepts that I decided to talk about in my paper was the concept of KAROS and the concept of stasis. And the first thing I did was to classify what a crisis speech is. And there were a lot of definitions from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, but the one that I found that I thought that fit the situation specifically was that the turning point for better or worse in an acute disease or fever. And that was the first definition. The second definition was an unstable or crucial time in which a decisive change is impending, one with a distinct possibility of a highly undesirable outcome. And that was once again from Merriam-Webster, and that was the definition that I thought fit the situation perfectly. So I talked about KAROS and the two elements that were involved in those, the principle of right timing and of proper measure. And then within the principle of right timing, there were three other elements that existed. And the first one was the element of right time. The second was a time of conflict and tension. And the third was that the problem that came about has brought an opportunity to discuss the problem where before there might not have been an opportunity to do that. And then I also talked about how KAROS means to adapt to the audience in a sensitive manner, instead of just like bluntly coming out and saying it. You kind of have to go around it and say it in a way that's not going to make people run away scared. And then I talked about stasis theory and the four different questions that come with that, the questions of fact, definition, equality, and procedure. I also, in my paper, decided to do background on why this was such a big deal and why it could have been an even bigger deal than it already was. So it was on a Monday, October 22nd, 1962, at 7 p.m. when President John F. Kennedy gave the speech that he had discovered these missiles. On October 16th is when he discovered them, and he did this by aerial photographs that were taken by a spy plane over Cuba. And it was a really big concern because the missiles were located 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And there was already problems going on about this for 13 days with the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union. And it all started when Fidel Castro took over the Soviet Union, and then Cuba became dependent on the Soviet Union for military aid and for economic aid. And the United States and the Soviet Union were also fighting the Cold War at the time, so there was already tension that was created from that between the two countries. And they ended up, at the end of it, they ended up reaching an agreement that the Soviet Union would remove these missiles if the United States promised to not invade Cuba. And the deal was reached and the missiles were withdrawn. In conclusion, there were a lot of quotes and everything from President Kennedy's speech that supported my analysis of the concept of KAROS and the three different elements that were included within that, and then the other concept of stasis and the four questions that were included within that concept. And in the end, a crisis is something that you don't really expect to happen. And when it comes down to it, you have to be able to present a speech that's not going to send people being scared. You have to try and relieve the tension somehow, and that's exactly what President John F. Kennedy ended up doing in his speech.